Before any missile crossed a border, before any general picked up a red phone, before any city had seconds to react, the signal would come from Greenland. Not from Washington, not from Moscow, not from Brussels. From a frozen island most people couldn't point to on a map. And by the end of this video, you will never look at Greenland the same way again. Here is something that should stop you cold. Greenland is the single most important piece of land on Earth when it comes to detecting a nuclear first strike. Not because of what's on the surface, because of what's underneath it, buried inside it, and positioned above it. The island sits at the top of the world like a sentinel, and the military infrastructure hidden across its ice sheet is the reason you are still alive today. That is not an exaggeration. That is geography. Most people picture Greenland the wrong way. They see it on a standard Mercator projection map and assume it's roughly the size of Africa. It is not. It's actually about the size of Western Europe. Still enormous, still the world's largest island, still one of the most strategically placed land masses on the planet. But the distortion matters because it shapes how we think about it. We underestimate it. We mentally file it away as remote, irrelevant, too cold to matter. That is exactly the kind of mistake that strategic planners cannot afford to make. And in a moment, you'll see why the world's most powerful nations never made that mistake. Let's talk about the Arctic corridor. If you draw a straight line, the shortest possible route, from Russia to the United States, that line does not cross the Atlantic Ocean the way most people assume. It goes over the Arctic. It passes directly over or near Greenland. This is what military strategists call the polar route, and it is the most direct path a ballistic missile or long-range bomber would take if anyone ever decided to launch a first strike. Greenland doesn't just sit near that route. It sits inside it. That one geographic fact changed the entire history of Cold War defense. If you enjoy these deep dives into maps and hidden geography, consider subscribing. There's a lot more where this came from. Now, here is where it gets genuinely unsettling. The United States recognized this polar vulnerability decades ago, and the response was extraordinary. In the 1950s, construction began on what would become one of the most ambitious military engineering projects in history. A radar network stretching across the Arctic designed to give North America enough warning time to respond to an incoming strike. Greenland became the anchor point. The distant early warning line, known as the DIW line, placed radar stations across the Arctic, with critical installations on Greenland's ice sheet. The concept was simple and terrifying: detect incoming threats early enough to give decision-makers time to act. And in a moment, you'll understand exactly how much time we're actually talking about. The answer is not reassuring. During the Cold War, analysts estimated that a ballistic missile launched from Soviet territory toward the United States would take approximately 30 minutes from launch to impact. That sounds like an eternity until you realize that radar detection, signal confirmation, chain of command notification, and authorization all had to happen within that window. Take away Greenland's radar coverage, and you slash that window dramatically. Studies from that era suggested that without the Arctic Detection Network, usable warning time could drop to under 10 minutes, possibly far less depending on launch location and trajectory. 10 minutes to confirm a nuclear attack and decide how to respond to it. The systems positioned in Greenland were not a strategic preference. They were existential. There is another dimension to this that most people never hear about. The radar systems installed across Greenland during the Cold War were not just passive listeners. They were integrated into a global tripwire. A signal detected at a Greenlandic station would be cross-referenced with satellite infrared data and other radar points within seconds. The confirmation process was, and still is, designed to filter out false alarms while moving fast enough to be useful. And false alarms did happen. There were incidents during the Cold War where radar operators received signals suggesting an incoming attack, and the world came uncomfortably close to responses that could not be undone. The margin between warning system and catastrophe has always been thinner than official statements admit. Thule Air Base is the part nobody talks about enough. Located in northwestern Greenland, roughly 900 miles above the Arctic Circle, It is the United States military's northernmost installation anywhere on Earth. The base was established in the early 1950s under a defense agreement between the United States and Denmark, which governs Greenland, and it has never stopped being one of the most strategically vital locations on the planet. It hosts radar systems that feed directly into NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. When NORAD tracks something approaching North American airspace from the north, the data often originates from equipment tied to Thule. And in a moment, you'll discover the one moment that nearly made all of this irrelevant. In January of 1968, a United States Air Force B-52 bomber carrying 4 hydrogen bombs crashed near Thule Air Base. The aircraft caught fire and the crew ejected, but the plane went down on the sea ice of North Star Bay. All 4 nuclear weapons were involved in the crash. There was no nuclear detonation. The safety mechanisms held, but the conventional explosives in the warheads did detonate, and radioactive material was dispersed across the ice. The cleanup operation was massive, classified, and only partially successful. One of the secondary components from the weapons was never recovered. It may still be on the seafloor beneath the bay. This was not a simulation. This happened at the single most important early warning location on Earth. And here is the part that should keep you up at night. The base kept operating. Because it had to. Now we need to talk about something that most documentaries skip over entirely. Greenland's early warning role did not end with the Cold War. If anything, the systems have been modernized and made more complex. The Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, or BMEWs, has been upgraded multiple times at Thule. Current radar infrastructure there is part of a global network that monitors not just ballistic missiles, but also satellite activity, space debris, and potential kinetic threats from orbit. The threats have multiplied. The technology has kept pace. Greenland's position on the globe has not changed by a single degree. Here is a fact that reframes everything. The geographic value of Greenland is not a Cold War relic. It is accelerating. As Arctic sea ice retreats, and it is retreating at a rate that alarms climate scientists, new shipping lanes are opening, new resource extraction becomes viable, and new military access points emerge. What was once inaccessible frozen ocean is becoming navigable water. Russia has been aggressively expanding its Arctic military infrastructure for over a decade. China has formally declared itself a near-Arctic state, a designation that many Arctic nations view with deep suspicion. The Arctic is not melting into irrelevance. It is melting into contention, and Greenland is at the center of all of it. The island holds an estimated 1/4 of the world's untapped rare earth minerals. It sits above oil and gas reserves that some geological surveys place among the largest undeveloped deposits on Earth. Its waters are increasingly navigable for longer portions of the year, and it remains the most strategically positioned early warning location on the planet, now with added relevance to space-based threat detection. When former United States President Donald Trump suggested purchasing Greenland in 2019, the reaction from many observers ranged from amusement to outrage. But military analysts barely blinked. They had known for decades what Greenland was actually worth, measured not in real estate, but in irreplaceable strategic geometry. Denmark's relationship with Greenland adds another layer of complexity. Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. It governs its own domestic affairs. It has its own parliament, its own language, Greenlandic, known as Kalaallisut, and a growing independence movement that has been gaining serious political momentum for years. The roughly 56,000 people who live on this island have their own perspective on the military infrastructure that dots their landscape. For many Greenlanders, Thule Air Base is a particularly sensitive subject. The construction of the base in the early 1950s required the forced relocation of the entire Inuit community of Pituffik, a displacement that Greenlandic leaders and human rights advocates have never stopped calling what it was: a profound injustice carried out in the name of strategic necessity. This is the contradiction at Greenland's heart. The infrastructure that protects millions of people from nuclear catastrophe was built, in part, by displacing people who had no say in the matter. The island that guards the world's most powerful nations is home to people who are still seeking full recognition of historical wrongs. Any serious discussion of Greenland's strategic future has to reckon with that reality honestly. Geography does not care about justice, but the people living inside that geography always do. And Greenland's political trajectory, including the serious conversation about full independence from Denmark, will shape who controls access to these systems in the decades ahead. That is not a peripheral issue. For military planners, it is a central one. Let's close the loop on the warning system question, because the answer is more precise than most people realize. Modern radar and satellite systems operating in connection with installations like Thule can detect an intercontinental ballistic missile launch within seconds of ignition. Not minutes, seconds. The heat signature from rocket engines is visible to infrared satellites almost immediately after launch. Ground-based radar picks up the trajectory within the first few minutes of flight. The combination of space-based and ground-based detection centered around the Arctic means that decision-makers today receive dramatically more warning than their Cold War predecessors did. The warning would come from Greenland, not because Greenland is the only place watching, but because Greenland is where the geometry of the Earth demands the watchers stand. Here is the final thought, and it is one worth sitting with. The world's nuclear powers have quietly accepted that a remote Arctic island, governed by a small autonomous territory within a medium-sized European nation, is the irreplaceable linchpin of global early warning. The United States spends enormous resources maintaining and upgrading the infrastructure there. Russia watches it closely. China wants influence in the broader Arctic. All of them understand something that most of the world does not. In the mathematics of nuclear deterrence, geography is destiny. Greenland is not a curiosity on a distorted map. It is the most strategically valuable piece of real estate on Earth. The next time you see that oversized island sitting at the top of a Mercator projection, remember what sits beneath the ice and behind the classified radar screens. Remember the displaced Inuit communities, the crashed nuclear bombers, the rare earth minerals, the melting sea roots, and the underground systems tracking every object moving through polar airspace. Remember that the first warning of a nuclear attack would not come from a capital city. It would come from here. If this changed how you see Greenland and the hidden geography shaping our world, hit subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop a like if you made it to the end. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people. And leave a comment answering this. Do you think Greenland will become more important or less important over the next 50 years? The debate in the comments is always worth reading. Links to further reading are in the description below.